The first thing I felt was a hand closing around my wrist. I had been standing at the pharmacy counter at Walgreens on Wilmington Avenue, waiting for my blood pressure prescription like I did every third Thursday of the month. It was an ordinary Tuesday in late October, the kind of gray Dayton afternoon that makes you want to get home quickly and put a pot of soup on the stove. I had my keys in one hand and my insurance card in the other, and I was already thinking about whether I had enough carrots for the soup when the pharmacist leaned forward across the counter and wrapped her fingers around my wrist. She was a woman I had seen dozens of times. 50-ish, dark hair pulled back, always wore the same pale blue scrubs. We had never exchanged more than pleasantries. I did not even know her name. "Are you Mrs. Calloway?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you Daniel's mother?" I told her I was. She glanced at the other customers behind me, then back at me. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said. "Something is wrong. Something is very wrong with the people your son is working with." I did not sleep that night. My son had always been the careful one. I raised him alone after his father passed when my son was 11 years old. And I watched him grow into the kind of young man who read every contract twice, who saved a portion of every paycheck, who never impulse purchased anything in his life. He was 34 now, a financial analyst with a degree from Ohio State, and 10 years of steady, methodical work behind him. I was proud of him in the quiet, deep way that mothers are proud when they see their children become genuinely good people. 8 months earlier, he had left his position at a mid-sized accounting firm to join a private investment consultancy called Meridian Wealth Partners. The firm was run by a man named Gerald Hargrove, the father of my son's fiancée, a woman he had been dating for just under 2 years. I had met Gerald Hargrove 4 times. He was the kind of man who filled a room with his voice before he filled it with his presence, tall, silver-haired, always dressed in clothes that were 1 degree too expensive for wherever he happened to be. He shook hands with the particular firmness of someone who had practiced it. My son had been cautious about the relationship at first. He told me that he wanted to make sure the job offer was based on his qualifications and not on who he was dating, but Gerald had apparently been persuasive. The salary was considerably more than my son had been earning. The office was in the short north, the kind of address that impresses people at dinner parties, and my son was in love. His fiancée was 29, pretty in the way that suggests effort, always pleasant to me in a manner I could never quite fault, but also never quite warm to. She remembered the names of my friends when my son mentioned them, sent me a birthday card with a handwritten note, called me by my first name, even though I had not invited her to. I kept telling myself I was being a difficult mother-in-law before I had even become a mother-in-law. I kept telling myself that my discomfort said more about me than it did about her. I had not told my son any of this. I had not told him, either, that I had noticed small things over the past few months. The way his phone calls had become shorter. The way he had stopped mentioning his old friends from work. The way his voice had taken on a quality I could only describe as managed, like someone who has been coached on how to answer a particular question. When I asked how the new job was going, he said it was great. When I asked for details, he said he would explain everything soon, that it was complicated, that he did not want to overwhelm me with finance terminology. My son had never once, in 34 years, worried about overwhelming me. The last time I had seen him in person was 6 weeks before the pharmacist grabbed my wrist. We had lunch at a diner near his apartment, and I noticed that he looked tired in a way that sleep alone could not fix. When I asked about the wedding planning they had gotten engaged in the spring, he said they were still working out the details. His fiancée, he explained, wanted something at a vineyard in Virginia. His fiancée thought their current apartment was too small and had found a house in Dublin. His fiancée felt that they should hold off on family gatherings until after the wedding to keep things simple. I drove home that afternoon and sat in my kitchen for a long time before I made myself get up and start dinner. After the pharmacist told me what she knew, I did not confront my son. I did not call him that night or the next morning. Instead, I did what I have always done when I needed to understand something difficult. I gathered information quietly, and I thought before I spoke. What the pharmacist had told me was this. Her name was Renee. Her brother-in-law had invested $60,000 with Meridian Wealth Partners 14 months ago, referred by a colleague who had done the same. The returns had been exceptional at first statements showing 15, sometimes 18% quarterly gains. Then, 3 months ago, when her brother-in-law had tried to withdraw a portion of his funds for a medical expense, he had been told that his assets were in a non-liquid portfolio structure and that withdrawal required a 90-day notice period. He had submitted the notice. The 90 days had passed. The money had not come. She had recognized me from the photos my son had brought in once. When he picked up my prescription and introduced us in passing, she had been sitting on this information for weeks, she said, not knowing what to do with it, afraid to contact the firm directly, afraid to go to the police without more evidence. When she saw me walk in alone that afternoon, she had made a decision. I thanked her. I wrote down her brother-in-law's name and phone number. I told her I would be careful. In my car, in the parking lot, I sat with my hands in my lap, and I thought about my son. I thought about the tired look on his face. I thought about the way he had said, over lunch, that Gerald Hargrove was really brilliant. That the man understood markets in a way most people never would. He had said it with the particular conviction of someone who needs to believe something is true. I had to know how deep this went. And I had to know without alerting anyone that I knew anything at all. I am a retired nurse. I spent 31 years working in a hospital. And what that work teaches you, more than anything else, is how to observe without reacting. You learn to keep your face neutral while absorbing information that would make another person flinch. You learn that the most important things people tell you are usually not the things they say directly. Over the following 2 weeks, I used those skills. I called Renee's brother-in-law and listened to his story for 90 minutes. I contacted 2 other names he gave me, people who had also invested through Meridian and were also waiting on funds that had not arrived. I drove past the Short North office building on a Wednesday morning and photographed the directory in the lobby. Meridian Wealth Partners occupied the 4th floor. The suite number was there. The name Gerald Hargrove, managing director, was listed beneath it. I searched public records. Meridian Wealth Partners, LLC had been registered in Ohio 14 months ago, 4 months before my son joined the firm. Before that, I found a dissolved company called Hargrove Capital Advisors, registered in Florida, also under Gerald Hargrove's name. That company had been dissolved in the middle of an investigation by the Florida Office of Financial Regulation. The investigation had been closed without charges due to insufficient evidence. But it had happened. I sat with that document for a very long time. My son's name was on the Meridian website, his photograph, his credentials, his Ohio CPA license number. He was listed as Senior Portfolio Analyst. His name was being used to give the firm legitimacy. And I did not believe I refused to believe that he knew what the firm was actually doing with the money it collected. But I had to be sure. I recorded everything. Every phone call with investors. Every document I found online. Every photograph. I kept a folder on my laptop and backed it up to a USB drive that I kept in the drawer beside my bed. My son had taught me to back up my files. The irony of that was not lost on me. The hardest part was continuing to speak with him normally. He called every Sunday. I asked about the wedding, about the house in Dublin, about his fiance's family. I told him I was fine. I told him I had been walking more. I told him I was thinking about repainting the kitchen. Every Sunday, I hung up the phone and sat with the weight of what I was not saying. The clarity I needed came from an unexpected direction. My son called me on a Wednesday evening. Unusual. He almost never called midweek, and his voice was different. Not managed. Not careful. There was something fraying at the edges of it. He told me that he had been going through some of the firm's client portfolio reports and had found inconsistencies he could not explain. Numbers that did not align between the internal records and the statements being sent to clients. He had brought it to Gerald, who had told him it was a structural artifact of the accounting software they used. That it looked confusing but was actually compliant. My son was not satisfied with that answer. He was going to look into it further. He did not tell his fiancée he had called me. After we hung up, I understood 2 things. First, my son's instincts were intact. He had not been completely absorbed. Second, he was now a threat to the Hargroves, and that meant he was in a different kind of danger than I had previously understood. I called the Ohio Division of Securities the next morning. The woman I spoke with was professional and unhurried. She took down everything I told her. The dissolved Florida company, the investor complaints I had collected, the discrepancy my son had described. She told me that what I was describing warranted a formal review and that I should submit my documentation through their official portal. She could not tell me what action, if any, would follow. She could not give me a timeline. I submitted everything that afternoon. I also called a securities attorney, whose name I had found through the Ohio State Bar Association. I explained the situation. He told me that the pattern I was describing, early high returns, illiquid fund structures, inconsistent statements, was consistent with a Ponzi scheme in its later stages. He told me that if my son's credentials were being used without his full knowledge of the fraudulent activity, my son could be at significant legal risk even without intent. He needed to stop performing any work for the firm immediately. He needed to document everything, and he needed to talk to a lawyer of his own. I drove to my son's apartment that evening, without calling ahead. He opened the door in the same tired way he had looked at lunch 6 weeks ago, and when he saw my face, he stepped back and let me in without asking any questions. We sat at his kitchen table, and I placed my folder between us, and I told him everything I had found. He was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that is not emptiness, but is instead a person reorganizing everything they believe to be true about their own life. He asked me how long I had known. I told him 2 weeks. He asked me why I had not told him sooner. I said that I needed to be certain. I said that I was not going to walk into his life with accusations against the family of the woman he loved without being certain. I said that I knew how it would have looked, how it would have sounded, if I had come to him the night after a pharmacist grabbed my wrist and told him that his fiancée's father was running a fraud. He looked at the folder. He looked at the printout of the Florida investigation. He looked at the list of investors whose money had not been returned. Then he said, very quietly, that he had known something was wrong, that he had known for about 3 weeks, that he had told himself it was fixable, that it was a compliance issue, that Gerald would straighten it out. He said he had not let himself follow the thought to where it actually led, because following it meant understanding that the last 8 months of his life had been built on something that was not real. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "I need you to call a lawyer tonight," I said. "Not tomorrow, tonight." He nodded. He was already reaching for his phone. What followed was not the kind of resolution you see in movies, where everything breaks open at once in a single dramatic scene. It was slower and more complicated than that, because real things usually are. My son retained a securities attorney by the end of that week. On the advice of his attorney, he documented every inconsistency he had observed, compiled every internal record he had access to, and formally notified the Ohio Division of Securities that he was cooperating fully with any investigation. His attorney filed a formal withdrawal of his name and credentials from all Meridian marketing materials. When he told his fiancée that he was leaving the firm and cooperating with investigators, she asked him to reconsider. She said her father was being targeted unfairly. She said the accounting discrepancies were a misunderstanding. She said that if he went forward with this, he was choosing to destroy her family. My son told her that he was not the one who had built something on a foundation that couldn't hold. She moved her belongings out of the apartment over the following weekend. He called me that Sunday, and his voice was not the managed, careful voice I had been hearing for months. It was just his voice, the same one I had known for 34 years. A little tired, but honest in a way it had not been in some time. The Ohio Division of Securities, in conjunction with the SEC's regional office in Chicago, opened a formal investigation into Meridian Wealth Partners. Gerald Hargrove's assets were frozen pending the outcome. The investigation identified 23 investors across 4 states who had placed a combined total of approximately $2.3 million with the firm. A significant portion of those funds had been commingled with personal expenses: a lake house in Michigan, private school tuition, a boat, Renee's brother-in-law was among the first to be contacted by investigators. He called me personally to tell me, and his voice on the phone was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for months and had finally been allowed to exhale. Gerald Hargrove was charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and misappropriation of client funds. His fiancée, her mother, was named as a co-respondent in the civil proceedings. The criminal case was still pending when I last checked, and I understand these things take time, but the charges were filed. The evidence was in the hands of people whose job it was to pursue it, and the 23 families who had been waiting for their money had been told that a receiver had been appointed to recover and distribute available assets. My son's name was cleared. His CPA license was reviewed and retained in good standing. His attorney confirmed in writing that he had been an unwitting participant in a structure he had not fully understood and had voluntarily reported once he identified the discrepancies. He lost 8 months of his professional life and a relationship he had believed in. He told me once, on a Sunday call, that the hardest part was not the anger. The hardest part was grieving something that had felt real, even if it wasn't. I understood that. I had grieved a few things that felt real too. There is a detail I have thought about many times since all of this happened. When I went back to Walgreens the following Thursday to pick up my prescription, Renee was at the counter. I thanked her. I told her that her brother-in-law would be receiving a call from investigators, that his case had been included in the formal complaint, that there was a reasonable chance he would recover some of what he had lost. She stood there for a moment without saying anything. Then she said that she had almost not said anything to me, that she had watched me walk to the counter 3 times in the past 2 months, and each time she had decided it was not her business, that she did not have enough information, that she could be wrong about everything. She said she had only said something because she had seen me walk in alone that day with a look on my face that she recognized. I asked her what look. She said it was the look of someone who already knew something was wrong, but hadn't yet let herself say it out loud. I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about all the small things I had noticed and set aside over the past 8 months. The shorter phone calls, the managed voice, the way he had stopped mentioning his old friends, the way his fiancée was always slightly too present in the edges of every conversation. I had known. Not what, not the specifics, but I had known that something in the picture was not right. In the quiet, cellular way that mothers know things about their children that they cannot fully articulate. What I had not let myself do was trust that knowing. I have since allowed myself to trust it more. My son came home for Thanksgiving that year. The first Thanksgiving in 2 years, where it was just the 2 of us, and a small group of people who had always actually been in our lives. His college friend from Columbus, my neighbor Dot, my sister who drove in from Cincinnati. He helped me make the pie, which he has always been surprisingly good at, despite never cooking anything else. We watched football in the afternoon and argued pleasantly about the Cleveland Browns in the way we have always argued about the Cleveland Browns. At some point in the evening, when the others had drifted to the living room, he sat at the kitchen table and watched me wash the dishes, and he said that he had been thinking about what he wanted to do differently going forward. He said he wanted to be more transparent with me, not because I needed to know his business, but because the process of keeping things from me, even things he told himself he was keeping from me to protect me, had made him more isolated than he had realized. He said he thought he had made certain choices over the past couple of years, partly because he had stopped checking them against anyone whose opinion he trusted. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands. "You don't need to check your choices against me," I said. "You're 34 years old. You make good choices." "I made a pretty bad one," he said. "You were deceived by people who were skilled at deceiving people," I said. "That is not the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. "Still," he said, "I'm glad you didn't wait." I hung up the dish towel and looked at him, this person I had raised alone, this careful, honest, tired, resilient person sitting at my kitchen table. And I thought about the pharmacist's hand on my wrist, and the gray October afternoon, and the long 2 weeks of quiet, deliberate work, and the expression on his face when I had placed the folder in front of him. "I'm your mother," I said. Waiting was never an option. He smiled. And it was the smile I recognized, the one that had not changed since he was 11 years old and still needed me. And I turned back to the dishes so he would not see my face. Outside, the November sky over Dayton was the color of pewter, and the yard was full of leaves we had not yet raked. And in the living room, my sister was laughing at something on television, and for the first time, in a long time, everything in my house felt exactly the right size.